Well, hello everyone. Thanks again for joining us here at the WPG Academy. We have another star in the percussion community. Svet, thank you so much for joining us today to give your advice to the budding percussionists of the WPG. I appreciate it.
It's a joy to be here. Thank you for all you're doing, and I'm super excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking to a few people from two seasons ago, and they say that your session last time was life changing. So I'm looking forward to your comments tonight. It's going to be a great one. For those that don't know Svet so well, he's a professor and director of percussion at the University of Miami Frost School of Music, and also a founding member of the Percussion Collective as well. An amazing collection of and collaboration of percussionists. So congratulations on all of your work there. So yeah, just fill it. I know we did this offline, but fill it everyone in that's watching what you've been up to recently. I know you've been traveling a lot.
Yes. I have been trying very carefully to focus all of my energy into specific things. I joke about with a lot of people, especially with my students, the older you get, the more you realize you will not have time to do everything you want. And you start really carefully thinking and appreciating the value of time and how you want to use it. So one of the main things I've been doing lately is just very specifically curating projects that are important to me
Mm-hmm.
and really providing more space for those to happen. So, for example, I completed a really beautiful project 2 years ago, which was basically a commission for double percussion concerto, which
Mm-hmm.
was written by Jennifer Higdon. It's called Dual Dual. It was played by a lot of orchestras, and it was the consortium was led by the Houston Symphony, and the Houston Symphony recorded actually a CD with this from the live performances, the live premieres.
Wow. Okay.
So it was a little bit extra stressful because of that, because we had 3 nights, but the piece is 25 minutes of red hot, lots of notes, very fast, beautiful
Yeah.
music. Highly recommend it to those who want to take a look and to play it, especially for the duos out there. So when that finished, I realized I'm really interested to explore that sort of collaborative nature of percussion further. And for a very long time, I've been wanting to commission a concerto for violin and percussion. I think that there's something really magical about all my collaborations with string players, and I really appreciate that uh, uh, what they're able to sort of bring to a collaboration that sometimes percussion does in a very different way.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a concerto consortium that's at this point almost complete in being organized. There's a phenomenal composer in the States called Christopher Theophanidis,
Okay.
who is writing basically a violin and percussion concerto. There's a beautiful set of collaborators that we have that's involved. It's led by the Colorado Symphony, and there are other people who are involved. I will keep this out of mentioning still because of contracting. But so I'm looking forward to that. I produce a lot. I try to release recordings that are really, you know, no compromise recording when it comes to not only the process of recording, but also uh, the actual, production of the recording itself. Where was it recorded? How was it edited? How was it mixed, etc. So I really focus more on doing this right now as well. I have a couple of things that are coming up, and I'm doing work for other people too, who have kind of heard some of my stuff and like it enough and said, "Can you please work with me on this?" So a lot of that's coming out. So
Yeah. Amazing. And fair play for sort of championing the duo concerto thing. It's something me and Jason did like a few years ago with LA Phil, and I know that feeling as well, because we did like a live video of that performance, and I know exactly what you mean with that. So
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
it's very funny because you can't get really self-conscious about the fact that people are recording, but at the same time, you do have to keep in mind that anytime you really let yourself play, you have to be 100% confident that what you're about to let yourself do is going to be really solid.
Yeah.
And so it was almost kind of this very strange extra layer of practicing you've got to end up doing for the sake of how, because to me practicing, I'm curious how you feel. To me, especially if you're learning concerto, you're not practicing so you can play the piece well. Obviously you have to do that, but you're practicing so that you can be as liberated to play as possible.
Yeah.
um,
I mean, my process was something that, I mean, I at that point, and even now really, I hadn't done that many concertos. So to go into LA, which was essentially my first concerto, was quite daunting, obviously, but also the process of learning is completely different because, you know, you learn like a chamber music piece and you'll learn it in its entirety, but you also need to learn it like verbatim per bar or section, because if the rehearsal is like, oh, go from 1-2-9, it's like, oh, you know, so
100%.
The process.
And you know, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying it's a very different process than anything I've had before. So
I 100% agree. It's interesting because also percussion, say if you're working in an orchestral setting, there's always that moment of learning how to anticipate playing with the orchestra. And when you're on the front of the orchestra, it's exact opposite. You have to anticipate, you know, to play much more with what you're hearing, and sometimes to wait a little longer, because if you're looking at a conductor, obviously, you know, there are ahead of the orchestra. Do not play with them. You know, it's a very funny, and percussion obviously plays almost instantaneously. Most of the sounds we make are very instant. They're not the same as a lot of the, say, woodwind section in orchestra might like to do. And so a whole different world. And, you know, I you know, we spend a lot of time with all my people who, you know, my students who work on concerti. It's a whole other process of not only learning the piece, but learning how to play it with an orchestra and knowing, okay, if a conductor does this or that, like, here's what you need to listen for. Don't just watch, you know?
Completely agree. I remember having this exact conversation with Pereira as well, because I watched the Stravinsky. They played Fireworks first before the concerto. Nice. And they played quite far behind Gustavo. And I'm like, this is going to be quite hard because this is something I can't practice. And obviously they're well versed. And he was like, don't worry, because anything contemporary, it sort of gets shrunk. And it's closer, which it was fine. But yeah,
that's right.
Again, I concur, for sure.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because in every orchestra you go, as you said, they have very different call, very different relationship with different conductors, and so therefore, how this very, you know, sort of phenomenon occurs is very different. So you have to realize, okay, here's how far they play from the beat. Here's how far I have to lay back. And, you know, I think with percussion, you're right. I think I've experienced the same thing where they also are very kind to accommodate and realize, okay, this is a more instantaneous sound. So, but so is the piano. So I feel like, yeah, it's a very unusual skill set to learn at first. But once you get it, you know, you want to do more of that, you know, and that's such a great thing. Yeah. I am so happy you guys came and did this in LA. I mean, I wish I could come. That's one thing about the United States. The distances are so large that if you say you're in the country, you're coming to the States, you might as well, like, you know, I'm in Bulgaria and you're in Iceland, you know?
Correct.
That's the distance. It's crazy.
All right. Well, we could talk for a long time. We've not spoken for ages, but I think we should probably move on because these guys are ready. So we're going to bring on Ion first. Ion, hello.
Hello. Ciao.
Would you like to introduce yourself if you don't know each other already? I don't know if you do, but what you're going to play, please.
So I am Ion. I come from Slovenia. I'm 23. I just finished Master 1 in Copenhagen with mostly Anders Can Elton, also Johan Bridger, Soren Monrad. On my bachelor degree, my professor was Simon Klauser, Slovenian. I was in Ljubljana before. And today I think I prepared, just a second, it's 2 movements from the keyboard partita from Bach. It's Prelude and Saraband. So we can just go chronologically, if you can call it that.
Sure.
I think that's it.
Yeah, great. So I'll play the Prelude.
Nice to meet you, by the way.
Nice meeting you as well.
Play the Prelude and then comments. Does that work?
Sounds good. Let's do it.
All right, here we go.
Beautifully done. So tell me a little bit about your experience with this music. I always find that to be helpful because it's easy just to give comments, but I think your context would make a huge difference to me too. How much time have you spent playing this music? Do you like Bach? Is this early on in your relationship with his music, or have you played a lot of this? Tell me a little bit about it.
I think Bach is probably my favorite thing actually to play at the moment, and it's been for a while. Probably Anders was
I don't blame you.
Inspirations for this. Yeah. Well, I've loved to play this before, but not in this difficulty, if I can say so. I mean, we all played, cello suites and stuff like this. But yeah, when I went on Erasmus to Copenhagen in 21-22 season, and on exchange, and basically I met Anders there, and I was like, what the hell is this? How is this even? I didn't know this is possible. And then I tried to pick it up. Yeah, I was Steven's player until 2022, basically. Yeah, and then he showed me a few things, and traditional feels really good. But with in terms of the music, the partita music. So yeah, it's been a year or so now, year and a half. I tried to do the whole thing right. I did some competition before. I'm gonna do it also in the near future. It's challenging, mostly when you have to play the entire thing, right? Because you need a lot of focus, and of course, it's so transparent that I don't think I've ever actually managed to play a movement without making a mistake. But I think the more important thing is the musical material than the notes themselves. Maybe.
Sure. I'm looking just to get the music here because I just downloaded it so I can see it here. Okay, let's see if I can find this.
Yeah, I think it should work. The link.
I have it on my computer. I just threw it. I also dropped it on my. So here's my initial impressions. First of all, I liked your performance very much. I appreciate the fact that I can tell that you have a relationship to this music. And I think that's really important because, I've had very different experiences. We have to play different type of music in our careers. And sometimes you really feel like you can directly connect with music. And sometimes it's not as natural, the connection. So when you're practicing in those cases, you're trying to build that connection. But it's really nice when it's natural connection because you can directly delve into much more interesting domains of music making. Now, I'll give you my experience of what I'm hearing because there's many different ways people play Bach. So what I want to do is maybe share, I'll start slightly earlier. So before I talk to you about what I hear when you play, I'll tell you a couple thoughts maybe I'll share about what I think percussion, about percussion's relationship with the music of Bach, okay?
Yeah,
and stop anytime. So one of the interesting things that I realized is that, obviously Bach did not write for us because he just did not know about our instruments. And so I think that percussion eventually fell in love with the music itself, and we all really wanted to play it as quickly as possible, as soon as possible, should I say. And so I think we got into a lot of this music. But one of the interesting things I remember, so probably you had this as a kid as well. When you were young, did you have to play piano as well as percussion? Did they require you in school to play piano?
Yeah, in high school you have a mandatory secondary instrument, and that's basically where we started. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's the same thing in Bulgaria, and I studied there. So for those who might be listening and don't know, but in Bulgaria, at least the education for music said this: if you're a percussionist, you've got to study piano early on because you probably are playing less pitched instruments than you should, and so piano can teach you about harmony and also pitch and help grow your musical ear, for everything you do. And I remember at the time starting to study, and playing some Beethoven and some Bach, etc. And I was realizing, wow, all the kids who play piano have such good quality repertoire. I mean, the same people whose concerti they play later in their careers wrote pieces that they also study early on. And I was thinking, wow, this is really awesome, And one of the things that happened is when a pianist starts playing Bach, by the time they end up playing some of the most complicated music, say the Well Temple Clavier or something like this, they have played through so much of the music that, there's tremendous depth that they build about understanding this music, right? And they've had a lot of information that's helped them kind of build an understanding of how to play Bach's music, Baroque in this case. So one thing I personally tend to think about percussion is we got into it much quicker because we did not have those experiences always. And I think that there's nothing wrong with that, but I find that there's a byproduct of that. percussion tends to play Bach a little bit more romantically than I think most performers who have played Bach for a long time would end up doing, because they also probably do have romantic composers who wrote for them, right? So they can understand the distinction between here's Baroque, here's classical music, here's romanticism, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the experiences I had is when I'm listening to you is I felt that, the notion was a little bit more romantic than I personally felt this music is meant to be. Now, I want to say I respect what you're trying to sort of bring in. You're trying to say, well, look, romanticism happened after Bach and I was born after that. So what's wrong with it? Nothing is wrong with it. So my question is, maybe if there is a way for you to try to play this music again, and where you have the actual, in this case, I would say all of the counterpoint, everything that moves slowly, not the melody, but everything that goes in an 8th note or quarters or half notes, and figure out how can you maneuver this music without ever really moving that timing so much. So if you have the slow music, bum, ding, dum, ding, dee, da, dum, bum, ding, dum, and allowing basically everything that's quick on top to never really over influence that slow, more stable music to a point where that music starts to push and pull too much. And I think that might be a really clever way to find the middle ground, where because you're a little bit more solid with that slower rhythm that moves, that I think that would help you basically find a little bit more of an anchor, gravity, to not over move those phrases, because I know it's very easy to move them given how ornamental the melodic line is, right? So that would be something I would recommend you to try. So the whole idea of, if you have that slower paced voices and move them and kind of try to keep them a little bit more stable, what happens is that is basically the middle ground of the piece. This way you can choose to opt to kind of fall back a little bit or to push forward a little bit, but you also have a very clear middle. And I think that's right now a little bit of what I miss. Because right now what I'm sensing is that generally you tend to like the idea of pushing phrases forward. And I think that in this case, if you're going to do this, I would suggest that you have a little bit more of a stable middle ground from which you push forward and back. So that is one. Do not enslave everything just to the melodic line too much to where it all just kind of pushes and pulls so much. Especially music which is tending to be a little bit slower overall. Like, this is not overly fast music. Also, one thing I would do is, if you have, can you tell me who are the people who you listen to who are Bach players who you just love the performances of?
At first, I tried to go like as close historically as possible. I didn't actually find any clavichord stuff. Probably it exists. I don't know. But I did Scott Ross, absolutely. And then because, we have dynamics, why not use the dynamics? I then moved over to piano. And then I think mostly the Andras Schiff stayed with me the most.
Can I suggest to you something? Those are really great players. And one suggestion I have for you to explore something very diverse that might be giving you a lot of information from one source is try to check out the Netherlands Bach Society.
I know.
I'm sure you know of them, of course. And what's so cool about it is that there they use some authentic instruments. They also use some more modern instruments. And the cool part is they do have so much content that's online, so you can actually see they're highly produced. So it's really well done. But you can see in one place, harpsichord, you can see Baroque violin, you can see Baroque cello, you can see different, wind instruments. It's such a great resource. I remember listening to this and kind of just letting my ear attune to some of the pacing, some of the ornamentation, some of just the generally how does this music, play. And I would say that might be another resource just to check out and to share here with everyone, with the community. One thing I will tell you, let me look at the music, for example, that here's the score. So, so let's see. We just listened to the partita, correct? Sorry, I'm not hearing you.
Yes, the first movement, the preludium.
Okay.
The first thing.
Right. So one thing that I wanna say is, I generally try to always think of the listener and what are their experiences when I play. So for example, what I'm talking about is specifically, when you learn a piece, you take hundreds of hours and we study it and we practice it and we try and test and trial it. We do all kinds of experiments to make sure we really are giving the best performance we're capable of in musically, technically, etc. But remember, the listener only has that one time to experience the music. And my question is always, what is that experience like? And what can I do to make it as impactful as possible, as being as honest as possible, right? So not just this is just to serve the music in most honorable ways and serve the listener the same way. So one of the things that I try to do is bring up the structure of the music as much as I can in many ways. For example, I try to analyze the music and try to find interesting moments that I want the listener to know about and figure out what can I do to identify them to myself, and then how can I play them so the listener can tell. For example, I'm going to give you an example of something. Do you know how Bach has sequences, right? So things that would happen over and over. Generally, when the music gets really interesting to me is where the sequence breaks and what happens with the sequence breaks. So I'm going to give you an example. If you look at this, you start, for example, in the first measure and a half, you have this, you have the melodic line go B, C, D, E, then D, E, F, right? You have dun 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 tin dun tin dun 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 ti dun tin dun pam dun dun, and you think he's gonna go ti do da do da right? You think of a sequence. So, but all of a sudden the melodic line goes da ti da da ti da di, right? And all of a sudden there's a huge descent. So in my opinion here, what I would try to do is actually I would open the phrase quite a bit more right away, just to try to show to the listener that the sequence is broken, and Bach has chosen to, actually ascend all the way to the very top and then start descending. So I wish that maybe if you like that idea, try to find more of these kinds of things. They're all over the music, and try to see if you can hear more of that yourself when you're playing it. So it's not just the knowledge, which I'm sure you have, of that these things are happening, but how many of these do you want to choose to actually bring out in a way where the listener can go, oh, I did not expect that to happen, right? To where all of a sudden the game is not only to listen, but almost to kind of try to involve them in a sense of, well, what's next? What do you think is happening now? Mm-hmm. Because this is a little bit more interactive way to play for people and for them to kind of feel like now they're engaged. Do you know Jacob Collier? You know Jacob Collier. Everybody knows Jacob Collier. So when he does this whole thing with the human choir where he brings in people.
Oh right. Yeah.
I mean, he would get people in 10,000 seat arenas to sing this now, right? And do you notice how people are completely enchanted because they feel like they're participating a lot more? I personally find that what we do in our art form can really do the same, especially in percussion, because it's such a physical, such an interesting art form. And I think that's one of the ways to engage people, where they almost feel like they have to guess what's next. And it's like a game of Bach playing with the listener and you showing what Bach's doing in places like this. So that's another suggestion I had. I felt like in a couple places, so you have a very interesting, so again, the technique you're using is wonderful. I love it and I understand very well. I'm a huge fan of Teo also, who has a lot of this, and I know he's created a beautiful thing. I find something very peculiar to happen, and it's, I think we all are guilty of this. When you have some of more ornamental work you have to do, and it's quick, you're obviously having to use a lot more technique and you have to be very efficient. I find that that's beautiful, but you also transfer that efficiency too much into places where you're playing 16th notes and there's nothing going on that's that difficult. Yeah. So try to think of it this way. What if we think about efficiency as something which is far more variable? So in other words, sometimes you are to be very efficient because that's the only way to give yourself the chance to play something effortlessly and to give it the shaping and musicality you want. Yeah. But sometimes actually being efficient is a detriment, meaning you almost have to be inefficient in order to play something with a certain speed of stroke and certain weight and certain... Yeah. Right now, I find that you tend to really focus on efficiency in places where... Yeah, where I feel like actually you need to kind of find a little more size in the movement. And you know what that does? it makes you rush a little bit. It's unintentional. But because you're having a lower stroke and you're kind of moving to different things that are coming up that are harder, it tends to kind of be overly efficient to me sometimes. So look into that.
That was really good.
Try to think. Oh, yeah, I had another little thing for you. So tell me a little bit about, so obviously this is the slow movement in a sense. Can you tell me a little bit about the palette you're looking for in this? Like from your perspective as a performer, what do you want this to be? And you can speak it in like your own language, meaning I'm not looking for some expected answer. So just tell me, what do you want? Like it's almost like a painter. You say, okay, these clouds are going to be dark blue with a shading of that.
So for this movement specifically, I see it as quite gallant in a way. It's not necessarily triumphant, but almost. It's kind of like this grand opening, but at the same time, I didn't want to start off, as like a fanfare thing. I start a bit more maybe introverted. The very first phrase, I mean, right? The first measure, and then I open up.
Yeah.
And sorry, I think that's definitely one of the main ones. And then also it depends how you perform. If you perform the whole partita in a performance or just a few movements, then I maybe change what I do a bit. For example, if I would only play prelude and saraband, for example, the second one, I would play the prelude maybe a bit faster, more lively, in this sense, more percussive maybe even, because then the saraband will be complete contrast. But if I play the whole partita, then every movement has its own kind of like, meaning / point. So yeah, maybe gallant is the closest word that I would choose for it.
I loved it, and I think it's a beautiful way to describe it. I detected the same thing. I find percussion, and that's like, again, something I think that has to do with our vertical approach to playing, right? Because everything is up and down mostly. I think percussion, we still have some way to go to figure out our capabilities and abilities to keep a palette defined. One of the things that I love about what you said is you're describing this in a way which has psychology to it. It's not just something that is mathematics, but it has actual mindset. It's like a hard set. Try to explore, especially in the places where you bring up the music forward when it comes to either speed or volume, or where the texture gets dense, where you now have the bass and the harmony move a little bit more actively, or you want to bring those up. Try to resist to kind of get all of a sudden beyond a certain point of elegance and kind of into the next step of what's less gallant and a little bit more patriotic. I feel like there's something really beautiful about how you started the piece. And so I would say the question isn't to play less. The question is actually, how can you reach the same amount of sound, but to stay away from that sort of density of contact? And the general way I can suggest you can approach this is by not letting your stick play too directly into the bars when you want more sound, but you want elegance. So almost try to approach this with, instead of doing this, even if it's gentle, it's kind of like in, try to actually almost think of gliding over and removing a little sooner. So you get this. So you're not sacrificing any volume, actually. You're just changing the density of the contact. You're changing that particular part of the sound. And, instead of kind of pressing the bar, if you slow this down into a slow motion camera, instead of pressing the bar so quickly, you activate it, but you're out before you really hit hard. I think that might help you retain some of the sound you're looking for in volume, but actually keep the sort of roundness of everything a bit more. That was another thought I had. I don't know how much time we actually have, just to make sure we can listen to the second movement as well.
Yeah, you're fine, because we've actually had someone drop out anyway. So you
okay.
There is one more movement though, just so you know. So
perfect. So we have a little. Do we have 5 more minutes to talk about this one?
You probably got, what are we? Yeah, I'm pretty sure we can make that work. That's fine. Just maybe on the second one, you won't have as long though. That's all, just so you know.
You got it. Thank you. That's awesome. Let me see more parts and I think actually we covered mostly everything I wanted to say. Do you have any question based on what we're talking about that you're curious about? Happy to answer. No, we can move on to the next movement.
Yeah, it seems slightly abstract when you cannot demonstrate things and show to each other on a real instrument and also like live, but this kind of like less density of contact. I understand this. I also understand this, but now I'm trying to imagine myself playing, and I see that it would I don't know how to call this. It would be difficult to actually replicate, I feel like. For me, just straight up,
think about
I would need to experiment for a while, to get the
so I can
that,
absolutely. One of the things I can share as a comment directly to help is stay away from dropping a stick down without telling it dropping how. In other words, right now, a lot of times, again, and it's a very natural phenomenon, it's percussive phenomenon. We all have to approach the instrument from up, play, and return, right? Generally, always try to be aware of how is that happening. What type of approach do you have? Because preparation defines execution. So how you approach will define what you get. And right now, sometimes I catch, unintentional moments where you kind of arrive and it's just sort of actually it's just a direct release where gravity may be driving you a little bit too much. I would suggest looking for something where before you hit, you already are preparing your departure. And that's what you're going to find. It's almost like when you're playing a bass drum or a timpani and you have this sort of, almost flex and kind of glide away. In some of these instances, especially in a slower movement, I think you're going to find yourself getting a lot of sound, but less of that core attack, which obviously sometimes you're going to need, but not always. That's all. Yeah, and if you ever...
a very good way of putting it.
Okay. And if you have questions, definitely find me online and we can find a time for us just to connect quickly so we can demonstrate. No problem. Awesome. Thank you. It's really well done. Let's play the second movement. This is the Allemande.
The saraband, is it?
Saraband.
Yeah, okay. Here we go. All right, coming up.
Very cool. Very well done. So let's talk about different things in this movement, right? I think we can definitely approach this from a different perspective. So um, I will talk about some structure and I'll talk about some technique here for you. So one of the things that I suggest that you examine a little bit is, what do you do when you play technically based on what the music needs more than what the technique makes you feel comfortable to do? So I'll give you a couple examples. When you have especially some of the ornaments, ornaments are actually very alive moments in the music. Ornaments are, think about what the word means, right? It's actually trying to put a little coulier, a little diamond onto a phrase. Like it's supposed to add a sparkle. It's supposed to create certain level of, sort of bravura to everything. So a lot of times I think, because there's so much going on around ornaments to us are kind of like a little bit of safe haven. It's like, okay, I can hold on for a minute here while I'll, buckle down for literally a lot of difficult music that's coming up. Try to think of the ornaments as something that's a little bit more alive, and not to necessarily keep them too mechanical when it comes to, sometimes that will be the case, but I would say also try to see if you can sing them out enough to where they feel like sometimes they have more life to them and they're places of music making. Okay, that's one. When you have, especially in this particular music, and you have these kinds of quick notes associated with a slower note, can you tell me what the tendency is going to be on just the mallet alone? What does the mallet do to this? Is it really bringing everything out, or what is the natural result going to be if you just play this?
So just this, like a short phrase?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, definitely, probably an accent on the first note and just like less clarity on the second and third. Oh, depends also how you play it, right? I generally try to use, so I go into the phrase with the hand, so maybe there is a slight tendency that the first note is more pronounced.
Right.
I just feel like it's easier for me to play, and a natural phrasing in a way, maybe as well.
Right. Yeah, but that's exactly where I want to ask you. Basically, that's exactly what I meant earlier. Be careful. What do you do versus what does the music need? So if you think about it, I completely agree, and that's something that happens with especially with yarn mallets on marimba. If something is light and fast, it tends to get a little bit blurry. So wherever you put emphasis, that note is heard, and then a lot of the rest can get a little hidden. So think about it this way. The way I approach this a lot of the times is sort of vocally. So try to sing up the voices. Do you want to hear babadoo, 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 which is a little bit jazzier? Or you want to hear yadado, tidado, tidado, where you actually literally sing out through these lines, right? A lot of the times I catch this exact thing when you say you kind of start with a strong muscular group, heavier muscular group. So I hear the beginnings, but I don't hear the middle. And I miss the middles because to me, that's where the actual, magic of this is, where you hear that those little meaning to an end. Tiraron, tiraron, tiraron. They're kind of these beautiful sort of connections. So try to make sure that if you're going to accentuate a strong moment, that you don't hide what falls too much, because I'm missing a lot of little detail there. And remember, marimba, obviously, it's a huge challenge to play this way because there's no control of resonance, there's no control of pedaling, right? So, there's a lot that sometimes hides music based on what else is going on. For example, if you accent the first note, but then you have also a bass line play, that already masks everything, etc. So I would say try to play a little bit more with the voicings and try to bring up some of the small notes so where they're really coming through, because they're not always meant to be hidden. In fact, a lot of the times I think they're just quick voices that are just more playful and needs to come through as well. And that's why I made a comment to you. Sometimes technique is going to make us feel that certain things are possible more comfortably. Like, for example, da-da-da, di-da-da. Obviously, that big gesture makes the first note stronger, right? But I would overcompensate on the rest. I will do ya-da-da, ya-da-da, da-da. Really work through these so you can really hear them and decide then what do you want to do with that. Because I hear right now very intentionally this very beautiful sound, but I think you're masking things that might be really fun to bring out and for you to hear yourself play. That brings me to an interesting comment I want to make. Because of that, I think sometimes places that I can tell you really love, I can hear you and I can see you hearing them, I think you're not able to sort of really bring up the way you hear them outside your own ear. So in that direction, I want to ask you a question. Can you tell me structurally, I'm going to kind of shift gears here, structurally, where is the peak of this piece for you? Like in this particular movement, where is the peak for you? Because I heard a couple of places where I thought, okay, maybe this is it, yeah?
Yeah. If I were to look at it playing repetitions, right? So 2 times A, 2 times B, for me, the peak is definitely going into the B part the second time. So when you go back to the dominant, that's at least how I structured it in this particular performance. I recorded the whole thing, so I tried to have the partita as the whole picture, right? In this case, I would say it's the beginning of the B part second time. If that's what you were looking for, maybe.
Yeah, sure. I felt like, for example, I also detected other places afterwards, like in the second repeat afterwards, where I heard you play, going, "Wow, okay, I think that this might be the peak." One of the things that
goes to C minor, yeah.
Right, exactly. When you have the trill and you're kind of going around for a while. So here's something for you to consider. I remember sitting down, especially when you know a piece very well. I think that's when we really start to dig into the little details, which is really important to do. And I really love that you have worked on this for so long. Remember that technically dynamics are kind of supposed to be doublings of themselves. So like if you play piano to mezzo piano, it's supposed to be twice louder than mezzo piano to mezzo forte. So the dynamic range and everything that comes with the dynamic range, like color, articulation, weight that you're using, so much linearity, etc. All of this, I think, has a tremendous palette here. One thing I noticed when I hear the performance, and maybe it's because of the recording, and I also listened to your other recording, by the way, which is just the entire link, so I could check that out too. I find that you really liked to stay in that sort of mezzo piano minus to like mezzo forte plus range. Like that's a very favorite range of yours. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But what I felt like, I'm wondering if you now go back and you say, okay, if I do have a wider range available to myself, which clearly as a player, musically, technically, you have a great range, what would I do with this? And this is not a question of just do it because you can, right? But figure out where are there places where your range can really help you shape this music a little bit more. Like I felt, for example, that this movement allows you sometime to really grow, but I don't think you chose to really go there. Also, generally, when you do that, it tends to be more on a stairwell kind of way rather than this. One of the hardest things, it's interesting, one of the hardest things for me always when I play marimba is to make long phrases, like as long as I can. The reason obviously is and we talked about it well, like for example, a space can really help us, resonant space where there's enough sustain and we can play, the whole is the instrument, right? But also, even just if I sit in a dry space, trying to figure out how to gently pace myself and to not let anything sort of, not to lose the phrase, as I like to say. I feel like here, that would be a suggestion I would share with you too. Don't lose the phrase. And anytime you're building, really sort of strive to very conscientiously have a strategy of how you're going to build into where. In this music, what I suggest you do is, find like a little map to yourself as you have. If you decide where the peak is, where the climax is, to really figure out why and where and how are you going to do all of this. You tend to play this music beautifully by heart. But I remember hearing, and I'll leave you with this comment maybe, one of the really phenomenal musicians who I was able to learn from, Leon Fleischer, who passed away, pianist, who has some back recordings. Definitely check them out if you can. He said to me, Leon, there's some music. Yeah. Leon Fleischer.
Yeah,
he said, there is a lot of music that you can play and start by heart and just play by heart. And he said, Bach, if you don't start with a plan, midway, you're going to realize that's a pretty huge problem. And maybe we can close this particular session with saying that's why both of us agree on how beautiful this music is and how much craft and art is there in the writing and how magnificent the structure is. Which is to say, I really appreciate your performance. and your love for it, and you can tell that it's there when you play it. And I hope what I'm sharing here comes useful and comes as just some ideas to explore. And definitely, if you have questions that we cannot demonstrate here, catch me online, and we'll find a time to connect.
Okay. Oh yeah, absolutely. This was very, very fantastic. I can see there's a lot more still to discover than I thought that there is. So yeah, thank you very much for this.
Thank you as well. Just to share with you, that is what I think. I was always as a kid curious what makes some music great and some music maybe not as great. And one of the answers I got is phenomenal music always lets us discover more about it, and there is more depth every time we come back to it. That's one way to know that a piece is just with depth.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how I feel about this, not just playing but also listening in a few years' time. You know how it evolves.
Absolutely.
Because actually, when you look at it, 1 year, year and a half, it's not even that long. Actually, it's kind of fresh for it to evolve into something new, right? It's probably still the first stage, but yeah, we will see.
And you know, also remember that the process of digestion is a really magical process. A lot of times, actually, I joke about it saying not practicing is practicing. You know, if you're not on an instrument and you have a lot of other influences in your life and you're just, you know, you've practiced enough and now the piece is marinating. That's also a huge part of this. And sometimes that's why sometimes leaving music alone and not practicing it for 6 months, a year or two, whatever, makes a better and bigger impact than if you did practice it all this time.
Very good.
Great. We're going to have to move on, I think. So well done.
Thank you very much.
Nice one.
Good job. Yeah. Great job.
All right. So we're going to move over now to Jake, I think. Hello, buddy. You okay?
Yeah,
Jake.
finally got into the.
You got out your car. Yeah. No worries at all. All right. So yeah, the floor is yours. If you want to introduce yourself and what you're going to be playing, that'd be great. I'll cue the video up.
Yeah. So this fall, I'm going to be going to Eastman for my master's, and the piece I'm going to be playing today for you is Burritt Variations.
Awesome. Nice to meet you, Jake.
Yeah. Hi.
All right. So we'll roll with the video.
Good job. So tell me a little bit about your experience with this piece. How long have you worked on it? How how do you perceive the piece? Tell me a little bit about your sort of side of it first.
Right, yeah. I first kind of began work on this piece June, um, before my senior year, and it was definitely like the most daunting, difficult piece I've ever kind of taken on before. Um, um, and I think one of the big things throughout the process for me was just reading it, because I have a big problem with reading notes because it's just something that's never really come naturally to me. So I don't know if you saw the score that I sent you, but I marked up a lot of it,
I
which
did.
which helped throughout that. And then a lot of the process for me was just kind of memorizing each bar as I go, rather than trying to read it, because there was no way I could. I think one of the biggest things throughout this piece that I wanted to do is push myself in terms of phrasing, and figure out like the start of it and the end of it, and where and what I wanted to show within that, and pushing and pulling of time throughout it, because because for me, before this piece, I've never had experience really doing that before.
Mhm.
So this was kind of my first time jumping into that. And yeah, those are like the main things I really wanted to get out of the piece. And because I was like doing this for auditions, I wanted to kind of show everything I could possible throughout everything. And while I think I wouldn't have changed the way I approached playing the piece, I think hearing it now, kind of some time away from it, I think at least now I would focus a lot more on trying to solidify a lot of the ideas, instead of thinking everything so like instead of thinking everything of like a micro level, like thinking more about like the bigger picture of things, I think is
Yeah.
something I really could benefit now from doing. Even though, yeah, like I said, I wouldn't change how I approach the piece, because I think I learned and grew a lot from it. But yeah, I think now I would change a lot.
100%. And
Yeah.
um, just to say, I think that a lot of times when we all have these experiences of picking up a piece, which just feels like a very daunting, uh, new, very difficult experience, at first, it may be intimidating, but just to remind ourselves is good also to say, well, that's why I'm learning this. That's why I'm growing from this, because it is difficult, because it is not something that I'm just fully comfortable with. And so, vulnerability and discomfort are a huge part of learning processes. And I think the moment that we acknowledge to ourselves that it is perfectly normal, and in fact, it's almost kind of a given that we're going to be uncomfortable and feeling very vulnerable when learning new things, especially things that really challenge us, such as art and complex artistic works. Then I feel like honestly, that's a very good feeling to have actually, because you know that if you're uncomfortable, you're probably growing. And also, if you're feeling vulnerable, that means you are um, open to the piece and you're experiencing, this moment of humanity that we all have. And remember, vulnerability is a very important part of music making. In fact, I think in a way, um, it's very important for it not only to be present during the learning processes, but during all of the performances, because that vulnerability is another word of saying humanity. It's another word of saying fragility. Is another word of saying just artistry. Allowing things to be created in the spur of a moment in different ways every night when you play them. It's a very special experience, and it's very important for those to occur. And thus, even though you learn a piece, it's important for you to let it, you know, be played different ways. Again, to have a recipe, if you will, or to have an approach that is not fully set in stone, and allows you certain, artistic experiences and art making every night when you play. That being said, I think you did a really good job. I did look at the score, and I was going to ask you about the markings, but look, just to make a quick comment, I don't think there's anything wrong with feeling like when you learn a piece like this for the first time, you may find it very difficult to remember, to memorize. In fact, first times with certain types of compositions and pieces can do this to all of us. The idea I would recommend is to try to figure out how to learn the piece as you go along. And for example, to understand what is the language of the composer and how can you best sort of ingest it into your system. And also to practice just every day a little bit of sight reading, because sight reading really can help you quickly start to sort of read up more ahead of where you play, and also to help you start memorizing music in a different way. Instead of just memorizing in saying a way of, okay, here is these notes, you can start looking into, well, these notes create this harmony and I can memorize it this way, or this is the scale here, or this is how this differs from the previous time this occurred. Many different layers of memorization. And so, that can be also something that you can just improve upon as simply, practicing it 15 minutes every day. Different thing, just put up a Bach chorale or a melodic line from any composer or a little piece that's for percussion, whatever it is, and just practice, sight read. About Alejandro's piece. So, one of the most important things I'd recommend to you is, first of all, he is a very precious figure in the percussion world, because if you think about it, he's one of the very few composers who has written enough music for us compared to, say, piano or violin, that actually there is now a performance practice of Alejandro's music, And also he is alive and well, which is very beautiful. And I think if you have a question, if you're uncertain about something, you have the ability to connect with the source themselves and to really get an authentic answer sometimes. So when you're learning music, do not be, afraid to consider contacting the composer. Just send him a note, and to ask questions that might be important for you to get the answers to, whatever they might be. In this particular case, here is a take one of many of Alejandro's music. So you said something about pushing and pulling, in this piece. Alejandro is a master rhythm maker, master rhythm writer. If you actually take all the notes away and you play this piece or a lot of his music just on drums, it will sound awesome,
Mm-hmm.
And so try to sort of consider not only doing this, but start getting a little bit more into the detail of how you do it. So, for example, I would suggest that you are more careful with pushing and pulling rhythms themselves. And if you want to push and pull time, maybe figure out what are the thresholds. Right now, I caught you doing two things that maybe I want to suggest that you revisit and kind of reconsider. I find that a lot of the rhythm in your desire to keep it really correct is too open. What I mean by this, ta ta ti ta ta ti ta ta ti ta 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 ti ta ti ta ta ti ta. I find that there is a beautiful design there, I think, to make sure that the rhythm is clear. But you're gonna find that there is a certain level of crispness and of uniformity that you need to bring to rhythm to give it certain nuance. So right now, if you open the rhythm too much, what happens is it starts to sound like the piece is slow. It sounds like you're playing it slower than you really are, because you're opening your rhythm so much that it almost kind of become kind of over-rounded, if you will. Mm-hmm. I would almost look at it the other way. So try to kind of make everything feel a little bit more compact and a little bit more neutralized that way. So da da ti da pa pa da ta ti da dam da pan ti da tin dan da ti da ti da do. And do you notice there is a little bit of like almost like a swing to it when you play? I think that itself brings a little elegance to everything and lets you feel like the piece is grooving a little bit more lightly, and it actually will sound a little bit quicker, a little sprightlier. Right now, that's one of the byproducts, I think, of opening the rhythms too much. So that being said, I want to ask you something out of curiosity. Do you play drum set some, or do you play multi-percussion some?
Yeah, I do a bit of both of them. Yeah.
Okay. So when you play marimba, especially, consider bringing some of these chops right into this music. So, all of these complex rhythms, all of the beautiful simultaneous displacement, sections in the music, all the different polyrhythms, polymeters, all that goes on, all of that is, masterful rhythm making, and in a way, sometimes drumming or grooving, and obviously with pitch added to it, right?
Mhm.
So don't hesitate to bring your experiences from the outside of the marimba world into this music. A lot of the times they're going to really enhance what you do, especially in a rhythmically dense piece such as this is, right? So definitely consider using some of those skills. So right now when you play, I feel like you're trying to sing out more than you're trying to groove. And I think that's because obviously, if you're playing a melodic instrument, you're trying to emphasize that melodicity. But I would say with the music of Alejandro Viñao specifically, groove is a huge part of the equation. So I would not sort of enslave one to the other. I would make sure that they can just coexist, melody making and groove making. I think those are sort of coexisting in sort of beautiful harmony. And it's just a question of, figuring out the equilibrium between the two, okay? But don't necessarily hesitate to rock out and to groove music like this. It definitely takes it. So let's see. I wrote a bunch of different notes here for you when we're playing. So you know how there's a lot of different sections in this music where mathematics are a very prominent factor of how the music was derived. Have you ever met Alejandro?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Have you heard like a lecture or something he's done? Have you seen anything of his that you can kind of understand how he thinks and sort of how he operates overall, or not really?
Sorta, yeah. I've heard a lot of people talk about him and the way he writes in my kind of while I was like trying to learn the piece so I could better understand him and the way he writes.
Gotcha. So, he is a very thoughtful, sort of deep thinker, very thoughtful writer. He is someone that I think takes everything through a certain process, and anything you ask him about, any note, any accidental, any rhythm, he has a reason, and he'll talk to you about it for a while. Actually, he'll tell you how he arrived to this decision and why it is there and why something else isn't there. So it's a very sort of he's a composer who really thinks deeply about everything he writes, and he really knows the music very well himself. So generally thinking, when you have mathematical equations inside, he has spent a lot of time sort of designing them and figuring out what I'm talking, for example, things like polyrhythm. When you have that middle section of slow music, there's all kind of da-da-ti, ba-dee-poo. So the math of everything is the basic of it all. But at the end of the day, and I talked about it with a wonderful player who I saw earlier, Jan, about his performance. Remember, at the end of the day, the listener, you want to let them understand the math, but truly what you're trying to let them hear is, well, all these tempi are happening at the same time, and somehow it's all working out. And I don't know how exactly that's happening, but it is, right? So try to make sure that you realize the mathematics in a way which supersedes basically the basic of that core of math, right? If something is 2 against 3, eventually maybe you want to try to make the two of them sound as flowing as possible. So try to stay away from emphasizing the math more than you need to. It's already there. What I will do is I'll try to see if I can bring up every one of these voices and make it sound correct mathematically, but also make it feel as linear and as independent from the rest of them as possible. So that is something that right now I really feel you are too true to when it comes to the math, but I'm hoping you can almost kind of overcome that to a point where no one even knows what the math is. But what they hear is, well, these voices are moving in different speeds. They interact somehow, but they also feel like they're completely sort of disconnected from one another. That's the magic of that. And that's where I feel like a lot of times when players talking about Alejandro's music, they say, it's just really dense, it's really hard, there's a lot of information, there's so little space in this. And I always, share this, the whole goal is to find space. And that's one of the ways to find space, where you are so in tune with these polyrhythms and polymeters that you can play them in your sleep and you no longer have to think about the math. And all you're thinking about is how to shape all of these, coexisting notes. That it almost sounds like it's a very highly organized chaos, but it's actually a totally organized order, right? So that's something I'd recommend you really look into, and that takes time. Like you have to look into, defining the threshold, put a metronome, and figure out how much are you really thinking of something, how much can you internalize it, and how much space do you have to open up the 4 versus the 3 or the 5 versus the 4, that kind of thing. Okay. Again, what you're doing is really great. I'm trying to ask you to kind of bring it to that next level where the listener doesn't think, oh, this is clearly 3 against 4, and they're thinking about this completely different psychological center where everything is about these sort of weightless sounds that are kind of traveling at different speeds, and somehow here do they connect, and again continually weightless moving forward. That kind of experiences. Awesome. I found that when you play the piece overall, you have something very, very wonderful about you. You're very focused. You're very committed to the performance. Be careful not to do this to a point where you're not letting yourself play all your 100%. We had a conversation with Aaron as well about this too, where, if something is easy or difficult, that does not matter to the listener. You should really never show us if something is hard or something is easy. But right now, you generally stay slightly on a cautious side. And what by that is I see you and I know you've got energy in you to play. So for example, I see this yum bum pee dum bum, and I would think dum bum pee dum bum ba dum bum pee da da, kind of a little bit more all out. Kind of, if I'm gonna groove this, I'm gonna groove this all right. You know what I mean? Because think about it. What that does is that brings energy to the performers. That first of all feeds you. You feel like that's your soul. That's basically soul food for you. That's kind of what drives you and energizes you to play. But then the listeners, the audience, are experiencing that energy, and that drives them and connects them with you. And that's really important. So don't hold yourself back. There's a difference between performing and playing. Don't hold yourself back. And I guess that's part of the process of learning music, where you can just feel like you can be really all out to play. And so that's something. And then in the piece, I kind of caught sometimes, you can still let grow and liberate yourself further. So the way to do this is to practice in front of people who you know and who will judge you, but in a very constructive way. So like friends who are musicians maybe, or maybe friends who are not. But let yourself kind of say, okay, guys, I'm make crash and burn here, okay? But that's okay. All I want to do is I want to try a couple things that I have not done before, and I want to see what happens. Because remember this, when you see really amazing polished performances on stages, that's not the first time that happened that way, and that is a process you arrive to. So all these people, they went and played, behind closed door to someone who, was not judgmental, and, they kind of had slip-ups here and there, and they forgot a note here, they made this thing wrong, and they then learned from this, and little by little kind of built that whole experience that they have and that they want to then have, then they want to bring to the listener. And that's a process. So continue growing in that process, because I think you're going to find that once you are there, that is actually part of the most fun you have when you play. It's where you feel like you go on stage and it's like, I can just rock out tonight.
Yeah. And like, sort of like a thing kind of going along with that is, I think throughout this process, if you know the name Cameron Leach, he was
Cameron, of course.
Wonderful
player, great guy.
Yeah, he was the kind of he helped me throughout pretty much this whole thing, and I think kind of through that, I allowed myself not to be within the performance as much, because I was really just trying to make it so that it was the best perceived, if that makes sense. And I think that kind of allowed that didn't allow me to kind of do what you were saying. Like, I didn't feel super liberated throughout.
Right. Well, I mean, look,
and,
but don't worry about this too much, because actually I think the reason is also there's so much detail in this piece, but that to get to the point where you're fully liberated, it takes time to play this piece. It takes digestion, learning the piece, and then kind of living with it for sufficient amount of time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So you will see, and I was talking about this earlier too. Sometimes also, once you learn a piece, let it sort of sit for a month or 2 or 3, and come back to it and see what happens.
Okay. Cool. In the future, when I learn repertoire that's similar to this in terms of like its length and its how hard it is. How can I kind of better prepare myself to arrive there? Because I feel like I'm pretty good at it now in like the learning of like the notes and like trying to figure out like, oh, okay, like this is what is like said. But then I think when I try to combine everything, I kind of get lost a little bit, and it's hard for me to kind of find the bigger picture in the moment. So how can I kind of arrive to what we're kind of talking about with rep that I will eventually play?
So first of all, when you keep learning music, you are gaining experience, which is very collective experience. And the more music you learn, the more you realize that you learn deeper every next piece, more so than the previous one, because you have more experience in learning new music that you don't yet know. So that's one, as you go along, remember that the process of learning music should keep improving, and it should allow you to ingest more information than the previous time when you had that first, time you looked at the music. So spend time reflecting on how you learn music and how you grow that process. That's something that you should think about. A lot of times I think I've seen a lot of my students kind of come in sometime and fall into the trap of the habit of like, well, I've been learning music forever and I learned it like that, so I'll just keep learning it like this. And I always tell them, look, in the last 5 or 10 years, you've gotten so much better at playing. Why don't you improve and grow the process of how you learn music? Because all that does is basically improves the speed and the flexibility of learning, the piece and the depth, of course. So keep thinking about the process of learning music itself as something that you can grow, and reflect on what are the things you want to improve. So if you want to approach, say, the next piece you play now, the question is, what have you learned from learning this piece that can help you, expedite the process or, more quickly digest certain portions of music, things like this. Also, remember, we are a little bit of creatures of habit, and one thing I would stay away from is to catch myself practicing too much without specific goals, just for the sake of learning, So, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, that's something that I've caught myself doing a lot, and every kind of time I try to play now, I think about the goal for the day, but then the goal for the week as well. Because I feel like I'm pretty good at like thinking about like the long term, like, oh, I'm playing this for this reason and I want to get this out of it. But then I think kind of like smaller goals is really important for me to kind of like tackle the project in like a more efficient way rather than just kind of approaching it and then taking it as it comes, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And efficiency is the key word to it all. Remember, in my life, I don't have the ability to practice anytime I want. First of all, because there's no gear everywhere I am. For example, I'm sitting in a hotel room right now and I need to practice, but I don't have an instrument right here, So get used to the habit, first of all, of not letting yourself get overstressed about that. And, I would say I actually spend more time now studying music away from the instruments than I ever have before. And actually, it's a very sort of rewarding experience that sometimes I think gets underestimated. Generally, I think more of us should be spending more time away from the instruments, just with the music, with the scores. For example, one thing that I'd recommend to you to try with another piece is before you even touch the instrument playing, because I think a lot of us, when we have a new music that we're going to learn, we can't wait to just put it in the stand and just play, right? But think about it the other way. What if you actually approach this from a perspective of, well, let me look at this. Maybe I'll play it on the piano for a little bit. Kind of just use the piano to go through the piece, analyze it a bit, figure out what are the main things that I notice. And I have this very weird thing I talk about where I say I can tell you about certain piece in Svet language. So like with my own words, here's what happens in this piece. Like say, okay, here we modulate to say C minor, and there's going to be a lot of 7 chords. They're going between C to F to A flat. Then there's going to be a melodic line on top, and there's the deception here, and the suspension here, and then we go into a rolling section. So you're kind of I'm kind of telling you the piece in sort of terms that, I'm kind of like taking your hand and musically kind of taking you on a little, stroll of the piece. Now,
Yeah.
there's numerous layers that you can kind of build with more and more depth and more specific information that can really help you, understand the piece way before you even touch the instrument. And then what happens when you play is, start going, well, wait a second, I already know what's happening next. It's a very interesting process. So it's almost like inform yourself and prepare yourself to play the next piece you learn, not on the instrument first, and see what happens. Also, I don't know, have you studied the sort of different kinds of memories that we all have as humans? Sort of what are the ways which we memorize? For example, muscle memory versus, hearing memory versus eye visual memory, things like that.
Yeah, I've heard about it a bit.
Yeah, study that a little bit more. You realize that generally speaking, the most important memory to get away from when learning is the muscle memory. Because what happens with muscle memory is, how you play something and eventually if you're not thinking, your hands keep playing. That is basically the one that fools us into thinking that we know a piece of music rather well, kind of at least by memory. But the truth is, that memory is not helpful to really learning music with depth, first of all. And second of all, it's the memory that's very unreliable when we think we've memorized something. So really get more into the analytical memory, the one that is kind of, again, as I said to you, you can really talk in words and describe to me this piece and what's happening. Here is this section, here is the climax, here is the harmonies, here's the melodies, things that are really much more specific and much more sort of important when it comes to what you're actually doing. But remember, all of this is also a process, and what is really exciting is that you've tackled a piece which is really difficult to tackle. I have a student of mine who is a little younger than you, who is also who learned con variations, and that was also the same experience. One of the first times they've had to play a piece that's that difficult, and they have never had another piece like this in their life before. And I always find that, first experience can be sometimes very kind of daunting. But remember, those first experiences also are inevitable. They're kind of that next, that they're sort of the bridge to what's next, which is the bridge to what is next. So I'm really commend that you have, taken the bravery of checking out a piece that you really like. And with Alejandro's music, because that there's a lot of his repertoire that's out there, what's going to happen is that next time you play music of his, the writing language is going to be something that feels more familiar, and I think you're going to find it's much easier to learn the music. Also, from my experience, when you play more and more difficult repertoire, the more the complexity increases, the more everything you've played before feels like it's more approachable. It's just a little bit easier to digest. It's a little bit easier to play than before. So that's another thing.
Yeah. Would you recommend me then trying out con and then kind of like applying the knowledge I have with this to kind of learn that piece kind of in the way we're talking about?
Not right now. So here is basically my general stance on repertoire, especially when you're in school. I tend to think that there's increasingly less and less time for students while they're in school to really learn everything that they really need to learn so they can get out and they can be empowered to have a successful career. There is time, but it's very limited, right? So a lot of times, I think repertoire, especially for students, should be very strategically curated, where you are giving them repertoire that is helping specific needs that the student has technically or musically, but also repertoire that continually teaches them things they don't know. So I would say, I think that eventually playing con would be really fun for you. I would say, however, if you want to approach another piece by Alejandro, I would make that be a duet, because you're improving on your, or duet, like chamber music. Something like either Book of Grooves or going to some of the larger pieces, because you are polishing your skill set, but you're continuing to kind of grow and learning more about music making itself. Because again, you don't have a lot of time to, and you have to get through a lot of other kind of music. For example, I remember some of my students who would look at pieces like, Morjou or Autumn Island, or they would go into something like Rogashanti, or they would go into theatrical percussion. and they'll go like, "Oh, what do I do with that?" That's the first reaction we all have. I remember when I was a kid and I asked Sejourné, he was coming in to give a master class. It's like he played this really difficult vibraphone solo and very tonal, super dense, technically super challenging. And I was like, "So what do you do when you get a piece like this and you see it for the first time?" And he he like gets the music out of there. Sure. He gets the music, he shows it to me. He goes like, "I do this," and puts it away. And honestly, I just remember thinking, well, that's something that is, I'm sure a lot of people as students feel like this. Like, what do I do with this? And so for me, that is the kind of thing I would recommend for you to consider. Obviously, you're going to work with Mike, who will guide you through this. But I would look into using my time in school really carefully, not only to play some of the pieces that I really love, which I can do on the side, but to really play all of the music that I don't yet know how to approach by default. And then to figure out how to do this, because then, it's easy to go back and later after school to learn a piece I love, but having kind of gotten all the arsenal of knowledge that I really need.
That makes sense. Okay, cool.
Yeah, sure. So what else have you played before the Vignale?
The biggest thing I've played before, and like the first like major project I worked on was Coolish Zine. I had played all of that my junior year. But besides that, I mean, it's been like a lot of like more building my ability to play because I didn't really play for mallet or mallet percussion before coming to college. So it was we like started with rotation 2, for example. Like that was like one.
Sure.
So like it was so like a lot of like stuff like that is when I first came to college, and then
So one thing to suggest to you is this: a lot of the times when you jump too quickly to go through, say you play rotation and you play something else and you go into a piece which is kind of like Vignales. Obviously, it's not what you did, but I'm saying if you want to jump fast, sometimes you're going to find that the challenge is going to feel a little bit grander just because you are kind of saying, well, I don't want to take just the next step. I want to leap 2 steps up as well, right? So try to kind of anticipate as much as possible. When that happens, it would take a little more time to learn the music. And I would say try to supplement as much as possible. For example, a lot of times when we're learning pieces, it's good to focus in, like, how these rudimental solos sometimes would have, before you play the solo, if you know how to play, a tris triplet, paradiddle diddle, things like that, then you can play this piece. Basically the same thing could be for this. Try to figure out what are the new things that you really need to be aware of, and at least to start understanding in depth. So while you're practicing, you're not feeling like everything is overwhelming. There's a certain level of comfort, there's a certain level of knowledge that you kind of feel like you're opening a door and it's like, okay, I have been to this side of the room at least, that kind of thing. And I also find that listening to this music, listening to more of the language of the composers can really help me. For example, Alejandro has the Book of Grooves, which is such a great cycle. He has Water, which is probably one of his really phenomenal pieces, even today. There is a Stress and Flow, which actually here at Festival Napa Valley, the guys are playing the piece. But there is Arabesco Infinito. There is obviously tumblers, which started everything. There's count variations, etc. So one thing you can do is little by little just start getting comfortable with the language of the composer. Listen to some of their other works and just kind of try to digest that. And next time you have to play a piece, I promise you, find that some of the modalities that he uses, or some of those kind of frequent visitors of the music, even though they're different every time, you're going to start recognizing them really quickly and say, oh, I know exactly what that is. Okay. Yeah. Do you have any questions? I know that this is so tricky to kind of be more specific, but if you have other questions, I'm happy to try to answer.
No, I think everything I had to say, I kind of like talked about with you throughout this. But that's a lot of really good stuff, and I think I kind of have a better goal of like what I'm going to be doing for the next 2 years. So
definitely. And it would be really interesting, obviously this piece is something you should work on with Mike, because I think that his experiences with the piece are very very different than anybody else's. I mean, it's written for him, right? And so it's a very special opportunity now that you have learned the piece so well and you kind of can let it sit for a bit to come back. And, it's one of the hardest things for me when I know a piece really well because I practiced for a long time to it's hard sometimes to come back and just kind of, wash your eyes, wash your ears, and just try to say, okay, can I just play this fresh? Well, you have habits. We've built habits. So try to see if when you return, before you start playing, you kind of do a similar thing. Study the score a little bit and try to say, okay, so how do I see these sections? What am I trying to bring in here? What have I been doing before? Am I seeing anything new here? Is anything else kind of coming to me that I should really think about before I even play? So kind of give it like a fresh look before you play.
Right.
And I think obviously working with him on this piece would be really wonderful and special. One final thing to leave you with, when you have the different sections in this piece is slightly different from Khan in that ways that, there's a lot of different variations, but I feel like there's slightly less a feel of sectionality between them. They're kind of a little bit more intertwined. But remember that the music inside them and the processes and the compositional recipes, if you will, are different. And right now, that's one of the things I would suggest that you really emphasize more. Try to play different variations differently. For example, one of my students, Shane, just played the piece, and we were talking with him a lot about it, saying, listen, every variation has a different focus. Try to make sure that you really illuminate that sort of technique or that music making when you play it to a point where a listener can understand more about that. And so, in simple terms, play different variations differently in very specific ways and identify more clearly, in more detail what those ways are, because that would provide a little bit more color and a little bit more variety to the entire piece. That's one of the things that's tricky about this really dense music. There's so much going on. So that can really help you also feel like you provide space for yourself and for the listener.
That makes sense. Okay, cool.
All right. Congratulations. Have a great time.
Thank you.
And really loved hearing you play and to talk to you about this.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jake. Great job.
Great job.
Nice one. Very good. Okay. And our final act this evening, Danny.
Hello.
Hey.
Hey.
Hello, Svet. It's really nice to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you too. Tell me about yourself.
So, my name is Dane. I'm from Zagreb. My teachers are at the Zagreb Music Academy, Igor Lešnik, and I also work with Ivana Bilic. I just finished my second year, and I'm 19. And today we'll work on the Niflheim, so we can get started. I'm sure you know the piece pretty well.
That sounds fantastic. Thank you for being here, and absolutely excited to hear the piece. Let's do it.
All right. I might have a little bit of an issue just booting this one, so just give me 2 seconds.
Okay.
No problem.
Svet,
I'm gonna just open the music here.
Yeah.
No problem. I'm gonna just find the score here as well, and send this over to my iPad, which is right next to me, so I can watch and listen at the same time. Perfect. Fantastic. Okay, this. So let's see.
Okay, I think I have it.
Awesome.
I haven't had time to test this because I only downloaded it this morning. I've been up away all day, so hopefully this will work.
Awesome. All right. Awesome. Great
Thank
job.
you.
So I have a few pages of the score. Oh, I see. I see. Okay, the few pages of the score in different places. That's what I was like, wait, where we are. So I will
Sorry.
skip. No, it's okay. It's okay. Don't worry. I got you. I got you. We figured it out. Yeah. Okay. Okay. I was like, wait. Okay. Great. I was like, for sure. Why am I skipping? Why am I missing you? Okay. So tell me a little bit about how long have you worked on this piece, and just about your experiences with it. What are some of the things that you feel are challenging for you? What are some of the things that you are still working through?
So this recording is from January, so a
Okay.
long time ago, for me. When this was recorded, I was playing this piece for about maybe 2 months, 2.5 months.
Gotcha.
Uh, and I needed I chose this piece. Well, my professor chose this piece for me. Because I was going to this competition in Spain for snare drum,
I see.
and there was also a competition for marimba. So I was just like, why not do both? And then
Why not do both? You have to,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I did both, and this was one of the pieces I played on the marimba competition. And at the time it was like a whole thing, this piece. Now it's totally different. I'm in a totally different phase, because I have just been playing it for quite some time, and there was a phase where I just didn't touch it for like 2 months, 3 months. So I have been on and off with it. But yes, what do I find difficult now? Well, some things I myself see on this recording that are not to my liking, is maybe not the differences between the parts even bigger. So if it's lyrical, more lyrical. If it's motoric, more motoric. If it's loud,
Hmm.
more louder. Is if it's quiet, you get to the
Okay.
point.
Yeah.
That's the number one thing. The second thing is, of course, all the wrong notes and the rhythms that come into play in this performance. But we'll put that on the side.
Yeah.
And what else? What else? Well, I have with this. When I look at this recording, I have a problem with the lack of visual performance. It looks like okay, and now I'm playing, and it's yeah. But that's not that's my note that I don't like about this particular with the
Well,
video.
okay, it's okay. Look, I appreciate, first of all, being really honest with yourself, and that's a really good thing. I want to share with you something that, because I come from the same part of the world where you are, you know, I feel like I understand in some ways the ways in which you're feeling, specifically when it comes to the kind of criticism. You know, it's very important to learn to be honest with ourselves, but in a way which is still very constructive. Meaning, when you don't like things, make sure that you are optimistic about that. That does not mean you're lying to yourself. It actually means that you're giving yourself a very healthy way to address the problems. So, what do I mean by this? For example, if I make a mistake, when we play, which by the way we all do, you know, I would. There's ways to say, okay, I made a mistake, and how can I make this mistake?
Yeah,
And versus saying, okay, I made a mistake here. What's causing this mistake? Okay, I think it's either this or this. Okay, I really need to check this out. Next time this shouldn't happen. I need to look into this. So every time when you have a problem with things, try to find a very honest but a very positive way to approach the issues you want to address. Because what that does is it makes you keep building and keep growing, basically, in your knowledge of the piece and in your confidence in your artistic travel and your journey. But at the same time, it does not make you feel like you cannot do something well. Okay, I
yeah,
had
of
to learn
course,
this. I had to
yeah.
learn this myself, and so be careful when you're talking about these things. When you say, "Oh, my things," I have problems here. We all have those things, and just make sure that you are not, being overly sort of mad at yourself about this, but just do it in a way that helps you continue to grow, because there also are a lot of things you do very well. I really mean that. So
Okay, thank you.
that being said, I took a bunch of notes while you're playing, just because I feel like That's the best way. It's nice to remember. So you said something I'm gonna start with because those are your words. So you said something about, well, in this piece I have to, when it's loud I need to play louder, when it's soft I need to play softer. The different sections have to have a little bit more variety to them. I agree with you, but I want to talk to you a little bit about this in much more depth than that. Okay. One of the things that I had to learn very quickly, the more difficult the repertoire became, is that I needed to understand very specifically how to do what you just said. Because a lot of times when someone tells me, okay, oh, you need to play just a little bit more lyrically here. I'm like, okay.
What does
But
that
then I
mean?
realized that, yeah, but the whole point of this is to not only understand what does it mean, as you say, but also to be able to listen for it and to be able to accomplish this inside a piece which is not doing only one thing.
Yeah.
So you're then learning a couple of things. One of them is you're learning basically to analyze a specific challenge musically, to find a solution that is both technical, a lot of the time technical, and then musical. In other words, if you cannot explain this in simple words to your friends, you don't know what you're doing yet. Because what I mean by this is for all of us. If someone says, hey, how do you play, for example, more lyrically here or more staccato here? You have to be able to say, I do this, I turn the stick like that, I phrase like this, specific things, like literally like a cook tells you, I put salt, pepper, and then boom, here goes the cake,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So the whole idea is to be very specific. Right now, that's one of the things you have to do. But another one is to be able to switch all these recipes of what you do inside the same piece. And that is difficult because a lot of times we as humans are not sort of as comfortable making a huge shift from one thing to another very quickly. It's like, when you slam on the brakes in the car, that doesn't feel great, And
Yeah.
so, no one just goes from really happy to really sad just like that. That does not happen naturally. So practicing how do you maneuver all of these psychologies and all these techniques and all the music making that changes in the piece. That's not easy to do. And I'm telling you, all these things are very different. The fact that you can, for example, play beautiful legato does not mean that in a certain section in a piece that's been very staccato all through, all of a sudden you can just switch and play that. So
Yeah.
practicing those kinds of mental shifts is a huge part of it. And that's why eventually we all have to make runs through our music, because that's the only way to really learn and practice how to do those things. So when you played, I will tell you specifically a couple of the places that I recommend that you can emphasize more on sort of explore how to grow those specific skills. I felt like generally your soft playing can be softer. Now, I want to talk to you about this very simply first, and I'll talk about it from different perspectives. Can you tell me, how can someone just play softer? What's a very simple way to think about volume?
Well, the different movements. So we don't move the hand, we move the wrist. We don't move the wrist, we move the fingers. We don't.
Right. So the smaller muscle groups sometimes can be it. But also, you know what very simply helps here? The height of your stroke.
Yeah.
So obviously it depends on a lot of factors, but generally speaking, if you want to play softer, the height of everything has to decrease.
Yeah.
So try to think about this when you're playing. Try to almost restrict yourself, like from your own perspective. You see, I'm being very specific, saying this section is supposed. Like I remember when you started and you're playing, starting measure 2 all the way through, measure 9, or later on when you're playing. Again, there was this beautiful place. For example, where did I find this? There's not a lot of soft playing later on the piece, but I did mark a couple places that I remember thinking, okay, this can be more delicate. Places like the Menomoso at 137. Basically, anytime that the music is softer, I want you to try to, before you even begin, try to already have a state of mind and specifically talk to yourself of what are the things I'm going to do to try to shift this. So that's number one. Number two, let's talk about it from a different perspective. So volume is not just a result of a high stroke, right, just coming down. Volume may be perceived in such a way based on, for example, the color of the sound we're making, the articulations we have, right? There's a lot of other factors that can result in something sounding louder than it might be, or than we might intend to play. So listen carefully, not only to the sheer volume that you use, but listen carefully to what else is going on. What's the
Yeah.
articulation? Is it too bright? Is that adding to the psychiatry, the psychology, and the flavor of the phrasing or the music? And that can help you also to identify this. And remember this, preparation will define execution. So for these things to work, try to prepare yourself both physically and mentally before you get into them. But that's one of the places where I felt like you can still continue to sort of gain some expressivity in the sort of soft. Now, I want to give you another version of soft when it comes to how to think about this. So when I talk to my students, one of the things that I try to do is to not only talk about the mathematics, which is high versus low strokes, but to talk about the psychological domain of what's it like. So if something is soft, most of the time you have to think about that particular kind of psychology, something which is more intimate. So think about not only those factors which are physical, but those factors which are kind of like poetic and artistic, and try to see if you can bring both your heart, your mind, and your muscles to do the same thing. So seek that level of achievement when it comes. It's almost like a different kinds of approach for the same thing.
Yeah.
Another place that I really felt like you have the right thing in place, but I think you can still continue to grow to find how to optimize what is asked of you, is what is in places like measure 66, the menomosa. The same thing happens, I think, at 130.
Yeah.
What was that? 137.
Similar motive. Yeah.
So one of the things that happens there that I noticed, and I checked out some of the video before, is you are doing something which the stick already does really well. You articulate. So I see when you're playing, I see some articulation going on, or you're dropping the stroke directly onto the bars and the stick articulates for you, right? But look at what the marking here is. Like, if you look at what the composer is asking, is basically they're saying, please do everything you can to both microphrase. You notice how every 3 or 4 notes have a slur? But then on the top, there is another one. It's macrophrase. So the composer is saying, can you please give me as long as a line as you can in some ways, and then in a shorter terms, make sure that everything has a grouping to it. So da-da-do-do, ti-da-da-da, ti-da-da-da, ti-da-da. But in addition to that, those groups then connect into longer lines, right? So physically, right now, what you tend to do is articulate a little bit too much. Can you tell me why that might be happening? Can you talk to me a little bit about what's causing this? Because, look, when I make mistakes, it's not just a question of saying I made a mistake, but the question to me is what's causing me to make this decision or something that ends up in what I don't want.
So the first problem is that I fixed since then is that I liked the general, like the dynamic how do you say,
range?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
With which I just played it I just played it, and then I have these like tenutos on every first, so that you get the measure and everything. So I played it not wrong, but I played it with too much intensity.
Okay. Yes.
Honestly speaking, I didn't have the time to think about anything else than the notes at that time. So now I play it completely differently, and that's the easiest to say. Oh no, it's okay. Don't worry. I play it now. Yeah. So
no, don't worry. I completely appreciate it. Yeah. I appreciate it.
It's just like in those 2 months or a little bit more, it was just like
trying to get through everything as quickly as you can.
Yeah, it was it was not enough time, and just But
so I want to give you
too much intensity.
I'm going to give you a couple ideas that can help you with this. So check this out. The more you get experienced in learning music, the more you should consider learning more information at the same time.
Yeah.
So, for example, I'll give you a very basic version of this. If someone is very, very young and very inexperienced, they're probably going, okay, I just want to play the notes, everybody.
Yeah.
I just want to play the notes. If someone is much more experienced, you're looking into, the context of everything. Where am I in the phrase? What is the dynamic? What is the color? What is the structure? What is the nuance I'm looking for? What is articulation? There's so many things you can do at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So when you get to places like this, if you're learning a piece, especially when you're learning a piece quickly and you don't have a lot of time, especially so, what our brain says is move on. You don't got time for this, right?
Yeah.
What I suggest to you is to do exactly the opposite of what's most like, logically makes sense right away. What I would do is I would actually pause and say, okay, because I don't have time, I don't have the time to keep returning to this. The first time around, here are the three things that I want to do right now that create, for example, that sort of lyrical oscillation, that roundness in the music. So here's the 2 or 3 things I'm going to write down to myself as a note here. So when I'm playing, I want to remind myself as much as I can to do this. So in your case specifically, I want to remind you this. The way I would make these decisions would also relate to physically accommodating what the phrase needs, but also the mallet itself. So don't try to double down on what the mallet does really well, which in this case is going to be to articulate. Yeah. Try to really use the mallet naturally as it already plays, and only supplement for the mallet when the mallet is not doing something you really want. Otherwise, try to work with the mallet in ways that you need musically. In other words, dream the sounds you want and make the mallet do them for you. You will not believe how much power there is in our human ear when we want something, because what happens eventually is, even now, if you're looking for certain sounds, you're not even thinking how the hands do it, right? Yeah. The most important thing is to figure out, if you want a sound, to get a very clear idea of what is it, as much as you can, to start exploring this and in front of a mirror and listening to yourself to understand how to do it. In this case, what I would do is I would look a lot more about, instead of doing this, which is still, there's a flow to it, I try to do as little gravity as I can. Ti-da-da-da, 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 ti-da-ti-da-da. To where the whole thing feels like if it's actually bicycling or like flowing or like gliding on the marimba, if you will, in order to achieve those kinds of things. So think about it from these perspectives. And because when you don't have time, trust me, it's not going to get easier. It's going to get worse. The more you grow, and I wish you, it's a very luxurious problem where you are safe. A lot of people, say, oh, I really want to have a career. I want to be called to play concerts. What do you think happens when you get that? Well, you have little time, you have less time. So what you have to get really good at is learning pieces really well, really quickly. So the way to do it, one of the things you got to do is very early on, very specifically strategizing on what you need to take care of, and then trying to make sure that you are making those decisions as quickly as you can and practicing that way rather than saying I'll get to this later. Because what happens is, when you're learning a piece, if you don't include enough information early on, you learn the piece that way, and then adding it later becomes much more difficult. Okay, so remember that. Think about this. Another thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit. Do you have any questions so far, or you
No, I just want to say that it's really a problem I have been facing especially for the last few months, because I have gotten myself into a huge amount of work with little to no time, and however that fun is, and that's a problem that you want to have if you want to have it, but I want to have it, so I like it. It's just something I have been really exploring on how to get the most of my time spent practicing, because before I developed my I call it a method of practicing, which is excellent, but it requires a lot of time, so that wasn't really ideal. And then I also had before a problem with sight reading. I didn't like sight reading, and then my approach was always, okay, I have notes, I read, I remember, that's it. And that's how I did it. And it would take me a month, but after a month, I could play a piece from the end, from the start to the beginning, with the general ideas, such as this, which isn't necessarily the thing you want exactly. So I have been getting a lot more into sight reading, and then learning it after I have the information in my head. And exactly as you said, learn it. And I noticed that it helps me if it has if it has more dynamics, if it has how do you say, tenutos and some notes that are louder. How yeah,
It
that
just, yeah, I understand what you mean. So
yeah
look, first of all, I will say this: it's a wonderful problem to have that you learn music quickly. Um, I think it's something that I have. I'm lucky myself to have been able to get a really great solfege teacher when I was a young kid, and she made us memorize a lot of music. And at the time, I was really mad. I was like, oh yeah, I want to practice my solos. I don't want to be singing, and memorizing the solfege, tunes. But I remember that now because honestly, this lady truly helped develop those memorization skills that now
yeah
come in really handy. So look, think about it this way: build on your strengths like this and build a process that you keep re-examining. So when you're practicing, we're just talking about this with a gentleman right before you. The process of practicing should be something that we keep evolving. It should become something that keeps growing. It keeps getting better, just as we get better as players.
yeah
So use your strengths. Like if you memorize music, that's not at all a problem, of course, but try
yeah
to figure out how you can supplement it. So one of the things you can do is
yeah
study the scores without having your hands on the instruments, so you can really understand what's happening. And then when you start playing, you're really well informed because you've read through things that when you're moving your hands and looking at the music, you don't have time to look at those things, right? So I would spend some time with a score like this. That would really help you then really expedite the process of learning music. To answer your question of what you said earlier, look, I will give you a couple pieces of my experiences and also some of the wisdom that I have learned along the way. First of all, I want to remind you this. You are at a time in your life when you're learning repertoire not only for the sake of music
yeah
that you want to play to other people and concerts, you're learning repertoire that teaches you how to play music and how to be a
yeah
really, the best musician you can be. Meaning, it's one thing to learn a couple etudes when we're young. It's a very different thing when you learn a 15, 20-minute concerto or a very large scale percussion solo or any kind of music that's larger scale. Those pieces are teaching you in a very different way about music than a very short sort of scale etude, which is important, but it's not the same thing. So it's really important to remember this, that at this stage of your life, those pieces, like for example, if you're picking up masterworks for say the marimba or multi-percussion, whatever it's going to be, it's really important that your first experiences with them are as deep and as sort of growth provoking as possible. Stay away if you can right now from rushing through these pieces because you are in a really sensitive time of your growth as an artist. And taking the most out of these pieces right now would really yield in a magical sort of, later sort of richness and sort of skill set that you have built. I definitely, there's a really famous interview with, do you know, I think it was Gary Graffman, who used to be the teacher of both Yuja Wang and Lang Lang. Okay.
okay
So Gary Graffman, obviously a concert pianist himself, used to be the dean of Curtis Institute. And when he was teaching Yuja Wang and Lang Lang, apparently there's a very funny interview. He told them, he said, no competitions for you whatsoever. And I know also that for at least a certain amount of time, he wanted to keep them isolated and focused on just learning about music rather than just learning music.
yeah
And there's something to be said about that. Of course, every person has their different ways, but I find that the stage you're in, of course, taking competitions is a healthy thing. Learning music and learning more of it is healthy. But when you're learning music that you don't know much about yet, for example, the first time I played a piece like Time for Marimba, I was a young kid and I knew nothing about this kind of music. I could learn the notes pretty quickly and get around to it, no problem. A couple of days I can memorize most of it. But then I was like, well, I still have no idea what to do with this piece. And this is where I would say take the time now, because later connecting these dots will change everything. So I would say I heard this from a really wonderful conductor who said to me, Svet, today with all the technology, with all the advances we have in humanity and all of the new ways that people have developed to do things, it still takes the same amount of time to go learn the Mahler Symphony, you know?
Yeah, that's true.
And don't forget that, because I feel that today, I know that every one of us is pressed for time more than ever, and that everything is kind of happening a little bit quicker. But I find that sometimes, and it hurts me sometimes to see it, that young people are kind of pressured sometimes with things to happen sooner and quicker than I think they should. I'm not talking about your case specifically, I'm just talking in general. And I really think it's important when you're in school, guys, right now, to, even if you want to learn a couple pieces quickly, to really take time to really learn the craft and the art of music, because this is where you should be doing that. So I'm really glad that you spend more time with Niflheim. I'm really glad that you said, okay, no, there's a couple other things I've got to learn. And to comment, what I'm commenting on is more of your comment on, oh, I've got myself to do some really, I have a lot of work to do and I have to learn music quickly. That's always the case. And it doesn't get any easier. But before you really start getting into a lot of the work, make sure that some of those really cornerstone, the kind of the Beethovens and the Bachs and the Chopins and the Stravinskys and the Prokofievs and et cetera, the piano world, for example. Learn all these cornerstones of rap that will change forever who you are as an artist, and give them all the time you give, because they will basically make everything else work much quicker. And then when you're going to learn fast music, the depth that you're going to gain, etc., is going to be very different. Okay, it's really, really important. But yeah, I think one thing you can do is you're practicing already. I like that you're being proactive about, sight reading and things like this. I also don't like it. I don't think there's many people who really enjoy sight reading in comparison to playing their favorite piece of music. But I will say, I appreciate the fact that you're honest with yourself. That's really important. And it takes some time. It takes a process for all of us to be really honest with ourselves. And it's wonderful that you're doing that. I'm going to switch for a second talking about your rolls. Okay. So I know it's a very short rolling section, and roll is a very particular type of effect that we all kind of approach from a different perspective. But recently, it was very interesting. Alejandro Vignao actually happened to stop by the States, and we just had an afternoon with him. He came to the Frost School. We talked about, and somebody asked him, "Hey, why do you not have a lot of rolls in your music? Do you not like rolls?" And he's like, "It's not that I don't like rolls. It's just that I'm not needing that effect of what roll is supposed to do." And he talked about it for a long time, just saying how roll is supposed to truly be a sustain. And in our case, obviously, it's exact opposite. So I want to suggest to you something to explore, if you don't mind. In a piece of music, which is like this, where there's so many notes and a lot of them are very quick, it almost seems that roll has, and the rolling section obviously is a slow section. Roll has the mission to kind of dissipate some of that tension, to kind of do like exhale. So I'm wondering if you can, in your practicing, try to explore how to do this when it comes to the speed of the roll and also the actual throughout activity of the roll. What do I mean by this? Roll is not a given constant that just keeps doing this. Roll should be something which is a little bit more alive, and inside it, I think there's more nuance that we can create based on speed, based on dynamic, based on color, than currently I hear you have. Now, again, there are many different players who would tell you different things, and I respect that we are all having our own unique technique and understanding of rolls and music. But I've always learned from everyone else, so I'm sharing what I think here. To me, roll is more alive of a process, and the speed of the roll especially is something that can be far more flexible so that you can create more expressivity, and it can really help, especially in voicings, when you want to show certain things. And I find that right now that's a place you can slow the roll down, tilt the stick a little bit up so that I'm not hearing too much of this.
Yeah.
And try to seek not only the roll as we know it, but seek the mission of what the whole section is about. Something which is more suspended, much more lyrical, less activity. Because technically you're playing roll fast here. It sounds faster than the actual 16 notes in 132,
Yeah.
So find ways to really hide this from us. You know, a lot of times I joke this with my students. I think a lot of times really great players are literally trying to create the illusion of something in music making. You know, you're clearly playing a role. You're clearly playing fast alternating notes, but you're supposed to create the impression, the illusion of something seamless and sustained and linear and sonorous and lyrical, right? Right. So that is basically where I would look into specifically, for example, taper the stick a bit, explore what is a good speed that obviously you're happy with, and especially when you're separating the sticks more, you have to increase the speed because otherwise everything sounds too rhythmic.
Yeah.
But seek that sort of illusion to come from a little bit more of a variable way rather than one very fast rolling way.
Yeah, you explained it in a great way. I really understand what you mean. Thank you. Because I like the speed because it keeps the tension high. That's why I like it. But I totally agree, and I haven't thought of that before. That this sound of the mallet hitting the bar is killing it. It's not that what I would want. So yeah, that's exactly what I need to figure out, how to find a sound that I keep the tension, and it's not necessarily the speed, because always I have, when I have been working on this part, it has been bothering me because I couldn't get it to sound right to me. Is I have just kind of been changing the dynamics and the speed, which is not right. Yeah. So yeah, thank you.
So check it out though. So tell me, translate for me this section here. It says funebre.
Yeah,
What does that mean?
like lyrically, like singing, like something along those
Where's the word from? What
So
language does it come from?
probably Italian or
Right.
yeah.
So I'm seeing it from Italian. It means funeral.
Oh, so
So
not
this is
singing.
kind of, so it's a very no. I think that you are correct in the sense that there's some singing in this, but I
Yeah.
think that there's some solemnity and almost kind of a darkness to it.
Mhm.
And I wanna comment back a little bit on what you said. Look, there is different kinds of context when it comes to roll, and sometimes what you talk about, the tension of the roll, does really need to come from speed.
Yeah.
So there is no one way to make it for this. You know, that's why art is so beautiful, is because everything is contextual. Everything is based on what does the context need us to do, and our decisions are based on that. But in these cases, I think what you're looking for, in my opinion, is actually to release tension. Because
Okay.
if you look beforehand, all you have been doing is you've been playing very quickly for a long time, right? And if you
Yeah.
notice, there is this beautiful sort of ritardando. Little by little, the music goes from um, quarter notes equals 126 to quarter note equals 98 to quarter
Yeah.
note equals 58. So there's basically a very beautiful gradual ritardando that's occurring here. And you notice it's actually sort of gradual. Every time that the tempo changes, there's a ritardando into it.
Yeah.
So the piece, by the code of the piece, is exhaling. It's actually providing this sort of release of tension.
Yeah.
So it's a very interesting way to think about this. Now, I do not want to tell you how to play this, because if you want tension, you should look at it. But my question is, how can you give that beautiful solemnity and darkness of this section? And in my opinion, I would look for maybe trying slightly different options than keeping the tension here when it comes to the speed of the roll, but actually almost on the contrary. Sing out almost as if you're singing an anthem. Try to find where the melodies are, and little by little, allow those to speak, and maybe intensify the roll when you want something to be expressed, but provide more space in that section overall, because right now it sounds too tense.
Yes.
Just one more thing to tell you. I wrote something here. Okay. Oh, something interesting. It's small. Again, there's so many. You do many things very wonderfully here. I'm gonna go to the very beginning of the piece. You know how when you have this, you have a lot of the alternations that are going basically You have basically one hand is playing all those sonati and the other one's playing
I'm
the
playing,
voicing, if you will.
Right.
So right now, one of the things I'm noticing is that the ostinati tend to be very passive compared to what the very
sorry,
passive.
No, before my what is very passive?
The ostinatos. So the hand that it repeats, the hand that continues playing the note or the note A, la. I hear this. You focus all of energy here, pa 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 pi pa pa pa. But this, try to see if you can actually make that ostinato part of the music making. And instead of thinking that all the notes that are marked accent and are basically the melodic, shall I say, emphases, because there's not really, this is not just a melody, they're kind of like, little fireworks that are going on. Try to see if you can use that actual layer of repetition to help drive to them and away from them, and use it to make more music. So it's not, but it's so the actual narrative, the whole music is much more connected together. And you're participating. Go ahead.
I said it leads to the places where
Right, because think about it for a second. How do you make this with energy and with intensity? Is to make it feel like it keeps propelling forward. And if you're using the ostinato to do this and to kind of use it to almost trampoline these notes from taka ta taka ta taka ta taka ta ta, almost feels like that intensity gets added naturally, right?
Yeah.
So don't make that left hand or whatever. Sometimes it's actually right hand, but don't make that ostinato hand too passive in the music making.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, let me see what else did I mark. I feel like that we discussed. Yeah, we're almost at the end here, anyways. Yes, I already told you about this, but one thing that I would do, and this is a very interesting suggestion. I'll leave you with this. For someone who does not have time at all in my life to practice sometimes as much as ultimately I would love. If inevitably when we get new music, we're learning it and we notice something that we've never done before, or it's a new technique or something we need to practice. You know what I would do? I would take it outside the piece. I would create a little exercise for it and I'll warm up with it. So I'm learning the music as I'm warming up to practice. So, for example, I would especially take the passages like at 66, the Meno Mosso.
Sorry.
66.
This is funny, but that's exactly what my teacher told me last week. To
Fantastic.
take pieces from a piece and start my day with that instead of technical. This is very funny.
Well, I mean, I will tell you this: if you have a routine to warm up with, eventually you need to keep changing that routine, right? You cannot just keep practicing the same things all the time to warm up. You can keep adding things or keep just changing things a little bit, because otherwise you're not necessarily warming up with the most important things you need to master yet. Always, right? So try to think of your warm-up routine as something that's a little bit more alive and it keeps changing. Maybe sometimes you go back to an old routine, but if you're practicing a piece which has its own challenges, I definitely would put those things into a warm-up routine. When you warm up, especially, please try to practice. If you're looking at these passages, support them more with the lower arm. This part here needs to play more into this, because remember, this phrasing happens from all these muscles, and articulation is happening much more from here.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want something to have a phrase, you have to make this with a longer portions of your arm, not with here alone, right? This is not sufficient. This is where the phrasing works. Okay? And put a mirror in front, explore it that way, and I'm sure you're going to find more new ideas, new approaches, because this is about, sharing ideas and creating together even more new sort of ways to approach the beautiful music we have in our repertoire.
Yeah.
All right. Well, sadly, we've come to the end of the session. Svet, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I know everyone's taken a massive amount, and they all thank you on their behalf. I think they had to bolt off actually, but Danny, have you got any passing quick questions or?
Well, I had a question, but it's not really quick. You touched before on that you practice a lot with like mental practice. So I was thinking, what was your most efficient way of mental practicing? Because I've started to embrace it, but I have things that work, but not necessarily at the start when I just start with working a piece.
Yes. Every piece has its own needs of how you practice it. Eventually, the more complicated the repertoire becomes, you will see that actually you have to decide how to practice a piece. So I would start there. A lot of the times, you're correct that there are certain things that you need to just touch on the instrument and to try. There's no way you can do about that, but simply acknowledge that and say, okay, this I need to try. So pick your battles. Decide what are the things you really can do away from the instrument and what are the things you just really need the instrument for, which inevitably there's no other way. Another thing you can do is sit on the piano and try a couple things this way, because it's really easy and you can get around a lot of a piece with 10 fingers versus 4 mallets. And so that also gives you a really good idea on how this sounds. Other than that, take little notes. If you use an iPad especially, what I do is I'll add a layer. If you go to Fourscore, I would add a layer and put all kinds of notes that just make me remember things that I noticed. And eventually when I practice the piece and I'm reading more, I just hide that layer away so it's not in front of me. But remember this, when you learn a piece of music, you're learning it, and there's no one way to do it. If you notice things, assume that somebody else might have not noticed them at all. If you imagine things, don't forget that. Because the most important thing is that you don't give your best impression of how somebody else plays a piece, but what you discovered about it, and give it your best take yourself. So that will be the process I'm focusing in on. Don't be afraid if you don't know things. Don't be afraid if you know that some things need to be tried on the instrument and that's it. And don't be afraid to try things that you have not heard anybody else do. As you grow, you will realize that studying music, mental practice is going to become more and more comfortable. And right now, what you're feeling is simply the fact that you're new to it compared to someone who's done it for 10, 15, 20 years. And just like right now you feel comfortable playing on the instrument, eventually mental practice will become comfortable too.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
Of course.
Thank you so much, Svet. Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much. It's been great.
The stream here tomorrow night, same time, same place. We're going to be joined by Garrett Mendelow, so he is going to be offering his advice.